We're now going to use the sine rule to find an unknown angle in a non-right angled triangle. So if we take a look at our diagram, we've got a triangle PQR and we've got an angle of 42 degrees. We know the length of QR and we know the length of PQ. We cannot assume there's a right angle in this triangle unless we're specifically told there is. So we're not told there is, so we assume that it's a non-right angle triangle. So the first thing we do is we're going to label the sides with small letters because the corners are already labelled with capital letters. So the side that's opposite capital P is going to be small p. The side that's opposite capital R is going to be small r. And the side that's opposite capital Q is going to be small q. Now, how do we know we're using the sine rule? Remember, to use the sine rule, you need to know an angle, its corresponding side, and another measurement. So we know an angle, angle R, we know its corresponding side, small r, and we know another measurement here, which is 22 centimeters. So that's how we know we're using the sine rule. Once we've worked out we're using the sine rule, we then write out what it is. And we have to write it in terms of P, Q, and R. So remember, it's a small letter that goes down first in the numerator. So small p over the sine of capital P equals small q over the sine of capital Q, and that's equal to small r over the sine of capital R. So we've written out the sine rule in terms of P, Q, and R. Now, we tick off what we know. First up, we know the angle at R, so we know capital R, so tick off sine R. We know small p, so we're going to tick off small p, and we know small r, so we're going to tick off small r. Now, we are asked to find angle P, so we're asked to find capital P, so we're going to put a question mark down beside the sign of capital P. Okay, capital P is what we want. Again, you only ever use 2 fractions out of the 3 fractions. And the 2 fractions that you're going to use, there can only be one unknown. So again, if I cover up the middle fraction, we're going to be using the outer 2 fractions this time of the sine rule because you know 3 out of the 4 quantities. So let's sub everything in. So small p is 22, and that's all over sine of capital P. And that's equal to small r, which is 80, over the sine of capital R, so the sine of 42. Now, just like before, we're going to cross multiply first to get rid of the fractions. So cross multiply. So we're going to get 22 sine 42. And that's going to be equal to 80 sine of capital P. Now, obviously it's capital P that we want, so we need to get sine of capital P by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by the coefficient of sine P, which is 80. So divide both sides by 80. We're going to get 22 sine 42 over 80, and that's equal to 80 sine P over 80. So the 80s over here will cancel out, and we're just going to be left with sine P. Now, this is where it's different. We're now finding an angle. Cast your mind back to right angle trigonometry. When you had the sine, cos, or tan of an angle, how did you find the angle? You took the inverse sine, cos, or tan of the other side. So we want to get P. So the only way to get P, the angle, is to take the inverse sine of the other side. So we're going to take the inverse sine, sine with a little -1 up high. That means inverse sine. And then open brackets. And then inside our brackets, we've got 22 sine of 42 degrees all over 80. And then close those brackets. And that's equal to P. In other words, angle P. I'll put a hat above it to indicate it's an angle. It's clearly an angle we're finding. So once you get to the stage where sine of P is equal to something, to get the angle by itself, you take the inverse sine of the other side. So now, remember, we're finding an angle, so we need to hit our shift button first, and then sine. So shift, sine, shift when you're finding an angle, and then hit your fraction button. And we're going to type in 22 sine 42, close brackets after the 2, and then scroll down, hit 80. Now be really careful here. See the way there's an outer bracket here? We need to have an outer bracket on the other side. So scroll right across to the middle of the fraction at the far side, and then close the bracket button. Then hit equals. So we're going to get 10.6034 is equal to angle P. So we'll round that to 3SF, so go to the third significant figure, which is the 6, go to the digit immediately after, which is 0, which is less than 5, so we keep the 6 the same. So our final answer here is angle P is equal to 10.6 degrees, and again that is to 3 significant figures. And that's our answer. So as I say, I cannot stress enough, when you're using the sine rule to find an angle, the method is exactly the same until you get to the stage where you've got sine P by itself. When sine P is by itself, then you got to get P by itself by taking the inverse sine of the other side. Remember, you're finding an angle. When you're finding an angle, you take the inverse of the other side and you use the shift button on your calculator.